Instructions on what makes us feel good now. I just wanna make you feel good now. Feel good, don't it? Come on. Do you wanna make it better? Just wanna make it right. Come on. Do you wanna stay together? I meant when I said it. And it's easier to run away than to look for what would make you stay. Do you wanna make it better? Do you wanna stay together? If you do, then let's please make some new memories. Do you wanna make it better? Do you wanna stay together? If you do, then let's please make some new memories. Do you wanna make it better? Feel good, don't it? Come on. Wanna stay together? If you do, then let's please make some new memories. Do you wanna make it
Hey everyone, welcome. Thanks for being here. I'm Adam Burke. I'm a program director at MDF in the Maine Downtown Center. And it's my pleasure to host you today for the first ever Main Street Fellows AmeriCorps program showcase. I'm joining you from my kitchen table, and thank you for joining from whatever table or desk you're at today. During the past year of unprecedented times, which have been so hard for so many of us, there's been a bright line of hope for me throughout, and that's been the Main Street Fellows AmeriCorps program. I want to give a huge shout out to Volunteer Maine and to the team here at MDF and the Maine Downtown Center for all they did to help get this program up and running last year. The Main Street Fellows AmeriCorps program brought critical support and capacity to communities across the state just as the pandemic hit the 6-month mark. There are 6 fellows who have been working closely with their local supervisor within a host Main Street organization and a community since October 2020. Downtowns are the heart of our communities, and our hearts were very weary and tired last year and continue to be. Wading through the ever-changing circumstances, confusing and disappointing at times, relief programs and more. And just when we needed each other the most, we needed to keep our distance. The fellows bravely took their AmeriCorps pledge while all this was happening. I will get things done for America to make our people safer, smarter, and healthier. I will bring Americans together to strengthen our communities. Faced with apathy, I will take action. Faced with conflict, I will seek common ground. Faced with adversity, I will persevere. I will carry this commitment with me this year and beyond. I am an AmeriCorps member and I will get things done. And that's just what they've done. It's my pleasure to share some messages now with you all from our US senators. And while this happens, if you want to drop your name and where you're from and in chat so we can all see who's here, that's wonderful and appreciated.
Over 50 years ago, I came to Maine to work for Pine Tree Legal Assistance, and in our office were a series of VISTA volunteers, the spiritual ancestors of today's AmeriCorps volunteers. So I know how important what you've been doing is, and I know the contributions you've been making to your community, to the state of Maine, and to the country. So I just want to recognize and appreciate and thank you for all the work that you've put in, all that you've learned, all that you've given to others, all that you've contributed to the communities where you've been serving. You've made a difference in your life already, and I'm sure that you will continue to do so. So thanks again for being AmeriCorps for Maine.
Good afternoon. It is such a pleasure to congratulate the inaugural team of AmeriCorps Main Street Fellows for your service to communities across our great state. My thanks to the Maine Development Foundation for making this hands-on learning opportunity available to these outstanding young leaders. I'm always so impressed by the dedication and commitment of AmeriCorps volunteers. This commitment to others has been especially vital during the pandemic. Here in Maine and across the nation, AmeriCorps volunteers have stepped forward, serving on the front lines of this crisis and have made such an important difference. Thank you for all of your service and have a great meeting. Good afternoon.
I deeply appreciate the senators taking a moment to send their appreciation to the fellows. It means a lot. Today, you're going to hear talks from each of our fellows. For anyone who's been involved with AmeriCorps or volunteering in general, you know that serving has an impact both on yourself as well as the community. Today's talks won't be a walkthrough of everything that the fellows have done. They'd be happy to talk with you more if you would like to have that conversation. Today's talks will traverse the spectrum from personal to insights about community development and social capital building to how to make Maine more welcoming and inclusive. It's been an honor and a pleasure to work with the fellows, and I'm really proud to share their stories with you today. So please sit back, enjoy, and try to clap so loud after everyone's talk that we can hear you from your corner of the world. I'd first like to introduce you to Eliot List. Eliot's a 2019 graduate of Franklin and Marshall College with a BA in International Studies in Spanish. He was born in Rumford and grew up in Bethel, and Eliot has always held Maine near and dear to his heart. Eliot's one of the 2 fellows serving in Skowhegan, and please welcome Eliot now.
How do we define where we're from? Is it where we were born? Where we were raised? Where we live now? I think there are few places that this generates as much controversy as the Pine Tree State. The question of who gets to claim to be a Mainer and the very criteria for admission are both unclear and hotly debated. In most states, merely being a resident would allow you to claim such a place as home and adopt the corresponding title. Yet the same cannot be said for Maine. No, in a state where the southern region is regarded as northern Massachusetts, things get more complicated. To determine what constitutes a true Mainer, I consulted the internet. The widely accepted minimum bar to entry is someone who was born and likely spent the majority of their formative years here. Though to some, simply being born here is not enough. No, your parents, and even your grandparents, must have been born here too for you to lay claim to this elusive status. A couple people even went as far as to say that you must be a 3rd-generation resident to be a true Mainer, because, as they astutely pointed out, the cat can have kittens in the oven, but that don't make 'em biscuits. I've always prided myself on being a Mainer, and I still do, even though according to the more stringent definition I might not qualify, since my dad is a Flatlander hailing from New Jersey. And I also always regarded this distinction between Mainers and those from away as harmless, if anything humorous. In my mind, Mainers are hardworking, self-reliant, practical folks, something I have always aspired to be. We're a tight-knit community, and we have to be. There's not that many people that live here. The winters are cold, dark, and unforgiving, and it brings a sense of pride to be a part of the in group. Yet, when I began my service, I began to see the harm and hypocrisy inherent in drawing this distinction. After all, aren't we all from away? Maine was native land for far longer than it has even been a state. In my work, I've seen this distinction used to reject outside ideas that challenge the status quo. Any idea presented by someone who's from away can automatically be written off because they're not from here and would not understand how things work. More frequently, I notice this dynamic when anyone bearing out-of-state plates is assumed to fit the from away persona. This persona was not created overnight, but was rather the sum of seemingly insignificant acts, such as driving the wrong way out of the one-way street at the local grocery store, standing in line while talking on a cell phone, or not nodding or greeting others when walking down the street. Though taken separately, these acts do not amount to much. Together, they have contributed to the notion of an outsider who does not and will not ever understand local customs. Anyone who is from away is automatically assumed to behave in the same manner, and an invisible barrier is erected between the from heres and the from aways. It's only natural to feel a sense of kinship with those who share your place of origin, but it is also possible to do so in a way that is not exclusionary. In Maine, Massachusetts may be the from away poster child, but as soon as we find ourselves outside of New England, meeting someone from Massachusetts suddenly feels like finding a long-lost brother. So why, then, do we reserve this camaraderie for occasions when we find ourselves far from home? First, I think because we know we have a good thing going here in Maine. After all, our slogan isn't Maine, the way life should be, for nothing. For many who select the Maine way of life, part of what makes it special is the peace and tranquility that comes from having less people around. Second, I think there are behaviors that are possible when living in a sparsely populated area that are simply not possible in an urban setting. I'm sure that if I waved at, nodded at, or attempted to acknowledge even half of the people I passed on the street in Boston, I would be exhausted and would quickly resign myself to no longer greeting people I didn't know. If I attempted to hold every phone call until I was not around others to avoid disturbing them, I would very likely get far less accomplished. And if I was always a cordial and courteous driver, I would very likely never get anywhere. Yet all of these behaviors are integral to small town life in Maine, and occasionally get challenged by those who hold on to their big city habits. Now, that is not to say that all, or even most of those from away behave in this manner. There are many who actively seek small town life in Maine because they want a slower pace of life and a heightened sense of community. Yet we mistakenly lump all of these individuals into the same from away box and try to wall them out under the assumption that their behavior will align with this from away persona. By doing so, we're making Maine unfriendly to exactly the kind of people we want and need in our state to continue making Maine the way life should be, and not Maine the way life happens to be. So how do we continue making Maine a welcoming home for everyone, not just those who can trace their ancestry back for 3 generations or more on both sides to a particular place in Maine? I recommend we start by adopting a more inclusive stance of what it means to be a Mainer, to be from here. While there will likely never be a clear consensus, I believe that being a Mainer is about embodying a set of ideals that come from time spent in the state with its people. What those ideals are will vary from person to person. For me, being a Mainer means to be hardworking, self-reliant, practical, reliable, kind to your neighbors, friendly to strangers, and assuming a constructive rather than extractive relationship with the state and those around you. For others, those ideals may be entirely different. But what is important is that you do not have to have been born in Maine or have lived a minimum number of years here to possess them. I believe that anyone, regardless of where they are from, who's spent enough time here to have a genuine understanding of the place and its people, or who is actively working to do so and wants to be a part of making Maine the special place that it is, can claim to be a Mainer. While this is certainly not a comprehensive solution, in my mind, it's a step in the right direction in opening our arms to those who do choose to call Maine home. Thank you.
Thank you, Eliot. And I hope you heard my applause, channeling everyone's applause for you. For those of you at home and in your offices, feel free to drop praise and snaps in the chat for any of our fellows after their talks. I'd now like to introduce you to Nick Adams, who's also a Main Street Fellow in Skowhegan. Nick graduated from Kent State University in 2020 with a master's in economics. And throughout his time there, his research focused on economic inequality in America. Among a long list of internships that he worked throughout his academic career, most recently before he was a fellow, he worked for a Cleveland nonprofit serving small businesses in Northeast Ohio as an independent consultant. Please welcome Nick Adams.
In high school, I was told I was lazy, I had no work ethic, was not going to college, and I wouldn't be anything that I wanted to be, and so on and so forth. I heard this stuff so much that I started to believe it was true. I even started to act in ways to prove these people right. I did get into college, but my first couple assignments didn't go so well. I remember sitting there thinking, man, maybe everybody was right. You know, maybe this isn't for me. Maybe I should drop out. So I called the one person that always has an answer, my mom. I remember talking to my mom, telling her everything that was going through my mind. You know, maybe I'm not cut out for college. Maybe there's another way. My mom told me to stop and to start to believe in myself the way she believes in me, and so many other people do as well. And I knew from then on, the only way I could succeed is the only way I knew how. And that was through hard work, and above all else, betting on myself. I put in extra hours at the library, met with all my professors all the time, surrounded myself with people that supported me, studied weeks in advance for exams, and above all, never gave up. And I ended up graduating with my bachelor's degree with honors. Towards the latter half of my academic career, I was presented with the opportunity to go to graduate school, and the same narrative arose again. Yeah, you're a pretty good student, but maybe not good enough for grad school. Your math skills aren't strong enough. You're getting in over your head. This isn't right for you. Before I could believe what any of these people say, and before I even had to call my mom, I thought back to that conversation we had my freshman year. And I knew I had to do what got me here. And that was once again to bet on myself and to work extra hard. So this go around, I put in even more hours at the library. I could probably tell you their hours of operation to this day. I surrounded myself with even more people that supported me, talked to my professors even more, got involved within the department, and did everything I could and never gave up. Last year, I graduated with my master's in economics. Since I've been in Skowhegan, I've seen a similar story. When I first got here, people were saying, "What are you doing here? Why would you come to Skowhegan?" Especially in the middle of winter from Florida. This town always has talks of things that are going to happen, but nothing ever seems to show. You're just here to do the same thing that everybody else has said they're going to do. And it would have been really easy for me to listen to these naysayers and even believe what they were saying if it wasn't for so many fantastic people that I've met throughout my service term, including my boss, Christina Cannon here at Main Street Skowhegan, Matt Dubois, the owner of the Bankery and Skowhegan Florist, Eli Saul, a local behavior analyst in town, and the great project that these people are working on, including Run of River, which will be the second whitewater park in New England, the entrepreneurial ecosystem work that we've all come together to really champion here in Skowhegan to create a more welcoming community for entrepreneurs and help businesses succeed. All their involvement within different organizations, boards, committees, and within the community at large. And Eli buying all these different buildings in the downtown for the sole purpose to see this town shine. Now, why would these people do all these things in a place that everybody says is no good? It's because they bet on the town. They believe in it. They work hard every day, and I've never seen any of them quit anything. Now, I know my story isn't only pertinent to myself in Skowhegan. I'm willing to bet this is true across the United States in rural towns everywhere. So I challenge you, whether it's a personal challenge that you're going through or something happening within your community development work, to focus on the people that want to make a difference, surround yourself with people that support you, work hard, never quit, and above all else, bet on yourself and bet on the town. Thank you.
Great job, Nick. Thank you. It's easy to bet on you. I'll say that much. Next up, I'd like to introduce you to Nat Blackford. Nat grew up in the woods and waters of Maine and has always felt lucky to live here. He has a joint BA in environmental studies and anthropology from Middlebury College and a graduate certificate in applied GIS from the University of Southern Maine. Nat is the Main Street Fellow at the Maine Downtown Center, providing service statewide, as well as in Lisbon Falls and Brunswick. Let's give it up for Nat Blackford.
Growing up, each summer, my family visited the same beach and marsh. I spent countless hours there playing in the water, paddling, and really growing to love the place. But over that time, I also saw lots of changes. The line of trees that used to separate the beach from the marsh died, bleached, and washed away in winter storms. A different winter storm breached the beach and filling the marsh, creating more of a shallow bay. Now, I can't say for sure that this happened because of climate change, but I can say that it really shaped the way I think about how climate change will affect me and the places I love. When I go back there now, I try to imagine what it will look like next year, 5 years from now, in 50 years. We've made a lot of progress on climate change, but it's also important to note that we haven't quite made the changes we need to make to prevent future impacts. I think one of the really big problems is that it's such a big problem. You know, we don't know where to start. We get stuck in apathy. We turn away. We don't engage. We can't imagine how it will affect our life. We can't imagine how it will affect the places we know and love, like that marsh and that beach. One tool that I've been thinking about a lot in relation to this is my imagination. I think we really undervalue and overlook our imaginations and their power. And when I talk about imagination, I mean imagining the experience. So imagining the experience of being on that beach and watching the marsh disappear. And you can often see this type of imagination at work in other fields. So in architecture, you might be looking at a model of a building or at elevations or floor plans. And the magic comes when you imagine what it will be like in that space, what inhabiting that space will feel like. This type of imagination also shows up in the work of Main Streets. When you're doing some sort of visioning process for your downtown or trying to come up with transformational strategies, you're looking around you at your downtown with all of its assets and challenges and imagining what it could be, what it should be, you know, what it could be in the future. And then you start to make some plans for how you might get there. And I think this process of imagination can be really powerful, and we can use it on these really big problems like climate change or equity, you know, racial justice. So what does it look like to apply our imagination to these big problems? Well, I would say that there are 3 important steps to go through. The first is to change the scale. So instead of thinking of the global problem as a global problem, focus in on your community. You can have a big impact there. Second, you know, break it down and imagine how all the different parts will affect your community. So if we stick with climate change, you know, how will increased temperatures affect your community? That's something that's been a pretty big deal on the West Coast in the last couple of weeks. How will sea level rise affect your community? How will more variable rain with kind of droughts and floods affect your community? One that hits pretty close to home for me is ocean acidification. I live in Edgecombe, right near the Damariscotta River, and a really big industry here over the last 10, 15, 20 years has been oyster farming. You know, it's brought in a lot of businesses, it's created a lot of jobs, it brings tourists in, brings money to the local economy, and the oysters also help filter the river and make it cleaner. As the ocean and the river get more acidic, the oysters will have a harder time building their shells. And so from this, we can start to think, how would it feel like to be in the town or to be in a Damariscotta that's being affected by ocean acidification? You know, waking up and seeing that a business closed, or that a neighbor lost their job, or walking down to the river each morning and seeing it dirtier than the day before. And then from there, pivoting into imagining solutions. So how might we fix this problem? And one thing that I always find helpful is to look at what others are doing. You know, where else in the country are they working on this problem? You know, I've heard of a program in New York where they collect oyster shells from businesses around the city and put them back in the river to create artificial reefs. So this can stop storm surges, create habitat, but also, as the shells dissolve, will help the water from getting too acidic. You know, we could develop a similar program for Damariscotta or for rivers up and down the coast, collecting oysters and mussel shells, clam shells, and returning them to the river to make the water cleaner and our economy more resilient. This has been a really challenging year or year and a half for all of us. And we're, you know, in the midst of pulling ourselves out of this pandemic. But we still have a lot of big problems that are facing us. Things like climate change, things like equity, things like the kind of reckoning we're facing in this country surrounding social justice and racial justice. And these are really big problems. And it's easy to be apathetic. It's easy to turn away, to not engage, to move past it, to ignore it. And I think one of the big things we need to do is kind of use our imaginations and imagine what we want the world to look like. What does it look like for my community to be adapted to climate change? What does it look like for my community to be a welcoming community or an equitable community? So I would really encourage you all to try this out on a problem that's facing your community. Because I think if we can use our imaginations to visualize some of the problems facing us and their solutions, we can move past apathy and help create a more equitable and resilient future. Thank you.
Thank you, Nat. I'm all for the use of our imaginations. Perri Williams is the Main Street Fellow at Gardiner Main Street, and she's a recent graduate of West Virginia University's Master's in Public Administration program. She was born and raised in West Virginia, and she has a deep passion for community development and outreach work. It's my pleasure to introduce you to Perri now.
I've always lived my life in fast forward. I graduated high school a year early. I finished my undergrad in 3 years instead of 4. And then I hopped straight into grad school with no time to really stop and think about what I was hoping to gain from it all. I did exactly what was expected of me. I didn't question it. And I filled my toolbox with the skills, education, and experiences that I thought would be the keys to a life that was fulfilling. I've always had a mind and a heart for public service, and so I trudged along through internships and seasonal positions with government agencies and nonprofits, just hoping to find happiness in my work in the communities that I was a part of, but I always came up short. I was a lot like a zombie, walking through life and dragging a leg behind me, just hoping I'd eventually feel alive. My journey of coming alive starts in Morgantown, West Virginia in September of 2020. In the heat of both the pandemic and the humid Southern summer, I found myself taking my first huge leap into a new life. What September brought me was the opportunity to start making my own path instead of just following the one set out for me by others. A chance to do something for the simple fact that I wanted to. So I accepted an AmeriCorps position in a city 15 hours from everything I'd ever known. I packed my things and I left behind my glass half empty life and headed straight for Gardiner, Maine. I recently read an article discussing how when people move across state lines, they're usually thinking a lot about what their new place is going to be like, their new neighbors, their new town. In short, all of the things that are going to come with a change of address. But what most people don't consider is the way that the move is also going to change them. Something happens when you move that far away from anyone you know. You create community. And it's kind of ironic that I came to Maine solely for that purpose. It was quite literally the job description. Relationship building, growing social capital, inclusive engagement, sometimes hollow buzzwords, but in this case, real meaningful action items that guided me along my journey as a person from away. In October, I really couldn't see the full picture yet, and I didn't know that while I was helping to build community, the community was also building me right back up. It was filling my cup, and it was giving me back the life that had been sucked out of me through the years of zombie walking. I stumbled into December with the Maine winter slowing my fast-forwarded pace through life. This weather is definitely not for the weak, but the holiday spirit on Main Street had me pausing to enjoy the individual days, along with some of the fun buy local projects that I was getting to work on. One of my very first major projects as a fellow had me interviewing local business owners, getting their stories, and creating uniquely personal social media posts. And it was really a privilege getting to hear all of these inspiring and resilient entrepreneurs tell me about their backgrounds, their struggles through COVID, and hopes for the future, and then share them with my community. And at the same time, I was creating personal connections with each of these people. My interview with a tax accountant led me to taking adult dance classes at his wife's studio. The graphic artist now sends me monthly stickers in the mail. The local brewers offered me a weekend job in their tap room. And the bakery now has my breakfast order ready and waiting for me on Thursday mornings. And all of it was grown from the roots of my work plan. My personal community was being brought back to life. As the warm weather's come around, I've watched Maine blossom around me. People are out and about again, and I've been able to watch Gardiner transition into this lively little town with events happening on basically a daily basis. The Main Street storefronts are full, and it's really exciting to watch my community grow and change with the seasons. As we're approaching the end of summer in Gardiner, a lot of my work has been focused on the downtown master planning process, an opportunity for people to come together and plan for the next decade of growth and evolution. A lot can happen in 10 years, and I've personally seen and experienced the changes that can occur in just 9 months. There are new faces to join these planning conversations now. People who are just like me and have found themselves in Gardiner are growing their community, filling their cups, and making a home for themselves. The plan provides a really unique opportunity to connect the new with the old, put words into action, and give people the same sense of ownership in their community that's allowed me to build a life here. There's a lot on the horizon for this town, and I feel really lucky to be a part of it. Civil rights activist Howard Thurman once said, "Don't ask yourself what the world needs. Ask yourself what makes you come alive and go do that, because what the world needs is people who have come alive." Coincidentally, when I was preparing for this talk, Adam had asked us, "What's alive for you right now?" And I didn't really have an answer then, but I do now, and it's everything. I live for myself and I live for my community, both the physical place and the people who make it special. And I'm really grateful to no longer be on a zombie walk through life. My community feels whole and I'm more alive than ever. Thank you.
Thank you, Perri. I'm crying again. Happens every time. Sam Perri is the Main Street Fellow with the Heart of Biddeford. He's pursuing graduate studies through USM's Masters of Leadership program. And previously, Sam has held positions in student affairs, LGBTQ+ advocacy, and food service, where he's worked with a diverse array of communities and developed skills that he brings forward into his service now and his life ahead. It's my pleasure to welcome Sam Perri.
We're going to start with a bit of a reflective exercise. I want you to think about the best community event that you've ever been to. Maybe it was a block party in the neighborhood you grew up in, or it was a pep rally in college. Maybe instead it was an educationally fruitful program in your city's downtown. But what was it that made it special? Was it the content of the program, or was it the way that the hosts engaged with the audience? Could it have been something else altogether? There are 3 lessons I've learned through my experience in creative community engagement I'm going to pass along to you that are applicable when programming just about anywhere. We begin in mid-2020, a time when we were all adapting to structural changes in our society. Now, many of us seem to be running out of fulfilling new activities at the height of distancing. What I'm saying is, at times we found ourselves bored, possibly due to the reality that we've never had to live this way before. I was lucky to join the Heart of Biddeford at a time when they had already decided to deeply consider the structure of the situation presented to us and see what they could do in continuing to plan fulfilling community events. And this is where the first lesson comes in. Lesson number 1, barriers can be assets. Initially, the CDC's guidelines stating that we couldn't gather in public spaces appeared to spell detriment to the world of community engagement. However, this structural barrier was actually an asset. You see, in the world of community programming, this was a new kind of challenge that we had yet to work with. We had no predisposed opinions of what the situation could be. It was a blank canvas with one permanent line embedded into it, and it was our job to make the masterpiece. We looked at the fundamental elements of the programs at hand. Traditionally, many of our events would more or less resemble street fairs. And then we looked at the physical aspects of the locations themselves. At the time, those locations were the Biddeford Middle School and the downtown district. We realized there was another way that people innately engage with these spaces every day. Driving. What if folks could experience events with their pods the same way? Drive-through events offered the opportunity to get out, but in a way that was safe for everybody. We managed to run 2 holiday events and a downtown donation drive using this model. All 3 events were successful. At the holiday events, families were able to see Halloween displays, reindeer, and other forms of entertainment. At the drive-through, donors pulled up and dropped off goods on a table. Another creative engagement project I've gotten to work on this year was designing trellises to cover exposed benches in Williams Court Park. These 3 benches bake in the sun all day, and during the summer, they're not really the most inviting to sit on. Once the trellises, which are being built from recycled bike parts, are installed, the community garden program will plant beans, grapes, and other vine-like plants. And when this project is complete, the benches will also provide shade and food in addition to a place to sit. So going forward, assessing the fundamental elements of your own situation and how people interact with the spaces you host events in can really fuel the way you design creative engagements, whether they're new programs or old ones being revitalized. So lesson number 2, design with intention. Intention matters. As part of an internship I had in the early days of the pandemic, I conducted a research project to assess student and educator needs. Social and emotional engagement were the most prevalent themes that arose between both groups. And here's where it comes into programming. Going back to the downtown donation drive from earlier, I sought to fulfill 2 intentions when planning that event. The first intention was to provide the most needed items to folks during a time of year, the post-holiday season, when these resources may otherwise be limited to them. The second intention was to address the social needs of our student volunteers from the University of New England. And here's how I know we satisfied both those intentions with this event. We had enough socks and pantry items to distribute to 4 local organizations, and dropping these off required several rounds of deliveries. And at each drop-off, members of those organizations thanked us and told us what these donations meant for them, especially during the time of year that the event occurred in. Likewise, several UNE students told us they were glad to help and to be doing something off campus at a time when those opportunities were especially limited. As we transition to a different period, it is important to remember intention is the core of a program, whether it is supplying a physical need, addressing an emotional one, or something else altogether. Successfully carrying out that intention is how your program gets credibility and further buy-in. It is just as much a metric of success as event attendance. So when you decide what your intention or intentions are, also be aware how you're going to determine if they've been actualized. Lesson number 3, the platforms by which your community engages need rhythm. This is all about comprehensive community building. In the modern day and age, those platforms tend to be a mix of social media and in-person interactions. This is more than having a consistent tone when posting online or speaking at events. It is also about how you engage with your audience every day. And building online community will affect your programming. Take, for example, Heart of Biddeford ran 2 socially distanced scavenger hunts using the app EventZ this year. One thing we noticed was several of our folks on our EventZ leaderboards were also our most active followers on our social media accounts. And in the months that followed, people also started talking to us in public about our social media activity. When we do not have consistent in-person engagements, being a consistent presence in the dominant online format is the next best thing. It reflects on our follower and engagement growth, as well as the feedback we've received at in-person events. Thus, we have continued to comprehensively foster community despite the changes in our overall situation. You could start doing this in your organization by considering what your campaigns look like, how people can and do interact with your content, and conversely, how you do with theirs. Are you loosely interacting in a social space or fostering an online neighborhood? Now, with all of this in mind, I want you to take a step back and think once again of the best community event that you've ever been to, the one you raved about. Consider the location and intention of the overall event and ask yourself, could this intention have been achieved any other way? I'm going to leave you with a couple of examples. Maybe it's an art show on a street downtown that's moved to a rail trail to attract cyclists and others who enjoy those spaces. Or possibly it's a trailblazing project that's adapted to add an educational, nature-themed scavenger hunt to it. But just remember this, wherever your creativity begins, the possibilities for programming are endless. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. It's been really cool watching you approach your service with such creativity and optimism to treat those barriers as opportunities. Thank you for all you've done in Biddeford. Next, I'm going to introduce you to Maggie Hirschland. Maggie's a recent graduate from the University of Virginia, where she double majored in public policy and youth and social innovation. Her academic, professional, and extracurricular interests converge at the intersection of social policy, research, and practice. And over the past few years, she's had the opportunity to serve as a research assistant at the Ed Policy Works Lab, where she explored the effectiveness of virtual reality classroom simulations on teacher prep, and at the Thriving Cities Lab, where she helped develop a field guide for urban university community partnerships. Maggie is the Main Street Fellow at Rockland, Main Street. Please give her a warm welcome.
What's next, Maggie, is a question I find myself being asked almost every day in what seems like almost every conversation as my time with AmeriCorps is wrapping up with about 6.86 weeks left. As my Encore timesheet keeps reminding me, I find myself being asked, what's next, by what seems like everyone I pass in the street. However, as I began to reflect on this question of being asked, what's next, I realized I've been being asked that my whole life. At the end of 5th grade, a teacher asked, what's next? Well, middle school naturally. At the end of 8th grade, teachers, coaches, what's next? High school. At the end of high school, senior year, the frequency of this question began to ramp up and more people were curious as to what's next, Maggie? From my grandma, my mom, my aunts and uncles, program advisors, guidance counselors. Everyone wanted to know what was next. College. At college, again, the cadence of this question increased at the end of every semester, at the end of every year. What's next? Before the summer internship. What's next? Before the research assistantship. The life so far had been a continuous cycle of what's next? This ramped up even more as I got to spring of 2020 with the last semester of college approaching. The question of what's next was bombarded at me by more people and more often than ever before. However, as COVID hit and we took a collective pause, this question of what's next seemed to lull a little bit. And eventually my what's next ended up to be this position Rockland Main Street at AmeriCorps for a service year. And so, November 1st, I found myself here in Rockland, walking every morning along the Harbor Trail, but still with that question of what's next, never fully seeding to the back of my mind. This is a temporary position, only 10 months, and so I never really viewed it as a full next in the what's next, just an in-between. However, as I was on these daily walks, I also would be listening to music. At the time, one of the songs I listened to often contained lyrics that really resonated to me. The lyrics go as follow: "My mind races with all my longings, but can't keep up with what I got." And that struck me because my mind was racing with all my longings, focusing on the what's next, and that was inhibiting me from keeping up with what I got. And so I asked myself, well, what do I got? Looking around, I found myself in a space that's physically inviting me in. The coast, the mountains, the brick downtown were all inviting me into Rockland. And this cycle and this ethos of invitation I found was consistent with all of the community members I had met so far who had continually been inviting me in for my very first week. Whether it be my landlady inviting me to join her at a weekly women's breakfast every Thursday morning on Zoom, my neighbor inviting me to volunteer at a local community garden, at that community garden meeting other volunteers who then invited me to join them on their weekly Sunday hikes, my boss inviting me to one of his favorite spots, a brewery in Union, at that brewery running into another group of mid-20-year-olds inviting me into their circle. I found myself in a community that was consistently and perpetually inviting me in and sharing what they got with me. And so now that I see I have this for me, how do I share that with others? Well, I continue to extend the invitation. And so when there was a new AmeriCorps member in town, I invited her to meet my friends at the brewery. When a coworker had a daughter home from college for the summer, I invited her to go kayaking. When a local art institution had a new intern, I invited him to my favorite coffee shop in town and continued this cycle of sharing what I got through extending the invitation to others. Thinking about this mindset more generally, I really saw how this was applicable to all the service I'd been doing thus far as well. I started off my service year by hosting a series of stakeholder interviews where we were literally inviting in different community members, leaders, other stakeholders to share what they got with us and vice versa. And this was reciprocated as they would then invite us to meet someone in their network and continue to expand the circle of extending the invitation and sharing what we have with each other. This built up and culminated in us being invited into an alliance that met every other week with this exact ethos and goal of inviting others in to share what they have, share their resources, share their strengths with each other in order to build a community that was more resilient, more vibrant, and full of more opportunities based on this culture of invitation and sharing what we have with each other. This reminded me exactly of what I had learned that asset-based community development is. How do you, as an individual, an institution, a community, focus on your assets, which you have, and share that with others in order to build a community among these shared resources and these shared strengths? This rings true for not only our institution in expanding and increasing the capacity of others by supporting how we best could, but also how could we use Rockland's strengths and assets, the physical, the local maritime history, the arts, the working waterfront, in order to build a community in a future that's true to who we are, to who Rockland is. This reminded me again of how it was important for me as an individual not to focus on the what's next in order to focus on what I do have, and how this also applies for communities not to focus on what they don't have, but rather focus on what you do have in order to build this more vibrant, resilient, and equitable community that's true to who you are. And so again, as I find myself with just a few weeks left in my service year, I'm being asked, what's next? By what seems like every person I know in almost every conversation I have. However, I find myself asking that question internally less than ever before and more at peace with where I am and what I got than ever before. So I'd like to thank Connor Oberst for penning the lyrics that grounded me and enabled me not to focus on what I don't have, what's next, but rather keep up with what I got and appreciate all that I have. And thank you to you all for listening to me today.
Thank you, Maggie, for sharing your journey there to inner peace. That is all the talks from all our fellows. So please give the loudest shout out you can via text in the chat. They all did a fantastic job. They're incredible people, and I deeply appreciate their sharing of themselves and their takeaways from their service with us today. It's a real treat and honor to hear from them. As you're dropping your shout outs, I want to introduce you to Dr. Kaylin O'Brien, who's been the chair of the program committee for the last year. And Kaylin is currently the Strategic Talent Programs and Partnerships Manager on the talent management team at WEX. She oversees external partnerships and steers an array of programs across the HR ecosystem. Prior to joining WEX, Kaylin worked in higher ed as a leadership educator at Hobart and William Smith Colleges in upstate New York. She holds a doctorate from Vanderbilt University in Leadership and Learning and Organizations, a master's degree in philosophy and public affairs from the University College Dublin in Ireland, and attended Hobart and William Smith Colleges for her BA. And Kaylin's going to be hosting a panel conversation with the fellows now. So Kaylin, please join us on screen and I'll turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Adam, for that wonderful introduction. When you list all of those things back to back, it makes me realize how overly educated I am. But speaking of things that we learn when we go through educative experiences, I have a ton of notes in front of me from the key takeaways from the fellows presentation. So I've had a chance to work with them a lot being a part of the committee, but it's been really wonderful to hear all of their reflections shared today. So the goal of this conversation is to give them all a chance to expand on some of the lessons learned and insights shared from their talks, and hopefully start to give us a sneak preview of some of the things that they'll be taking with them, not to quote Maggie too much, but as they move towards wherever they end up next. And so I'll invite the fellows into the conversation. We have a couple of questions prepared. I'll share those questions, and then we'll just get ourselves going with discussion. So I'm starting to see you appear on the screen. There we go. Awesome. Great. So this first question really does build off of the segue that Maggie provided. And while I won't actually ask you to tell us all what's next, I am going to ask you to reflect a little bit on what you plan on taking from your fellowship experience as you move towards whatever happens to be next for you. And so feel free to chime in with your thoughts whenever they come to mind. And I'll look for whoever unmutes first. Maggie, look at that. There you go. Taking us off where you left off.
I figured it was only natural to kind of continue where I was. And in addition to the idea of invitation and making sure I kind of keep that mindset with me, I think being intentional about where you are and where you go and doing your research of what's going on in your town, whether it be keeping up with the different offerings at the local institutions like restaurants and businesses and supporting there, or seeing what kind of other volunteer opportunities with other nonprofits exist, being intentional about doing that research and then putting yourself out there to show up and make those relationships with people across the town has been really beneficial for me. And I think that whenever I move somewhere new, I'll keep that mindset with me and try to really make sure I do put myself out there, but also be aware of when you go to these different places and meet new people, how do you feel? Like what feels like home for you, to kind of go with the Eliot connection there and be intentional, like what Sam said. But all of these ideas really ring true in kind of what I want to take with me.
Yeah, I noticed intentionality definitely seemed to be some of a more overt theme for some of you, but was an undercurrent across all of your talks. Other thoughts on what you plan on taking with you?
Yeah, My position has been kind of more of a statewide position, so I haven't spent a huge amount of time in any particular community, but kind of from that statewide focus, I've just been continually inspired by how much people care about the place that they live in and how much time and energy and effort everyone is putting in to help make their community a better place. And I think that's kind of a big lesson for me and something that I'm gonna carry with me into the future.
Yeah, definitely. I think regardless of the size or what a community is going through, when you really do take the time to look around, you realize just how much of a collective effort it is. Other thoughts on this one?
I'm definitely going to keep the concept of applied creativity with me. I hadn't gotten to explore that area in a position like this before, and I've gotten to learn about social media management, the way we engage with spaces, video editing, all things that were new to me. And I'm going to keep that going forward because you just never know what you're going to learn. And you also never know what types of projects you can apply it to.
Yeah, I think that was another thing that I noticed in your talks, and then in some of the conversations I've been fortunate enough to have with each of you, is it seems like you're not only learning things about yourselves, but then you're learning this tactical, strategic elements of what it takes to be effective in communities. So being able to balance the two and take both with you is definitely good. Nick, I thought I saw you unmute there.
Yeah, a couple times. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Yeah, so I think just the mindset that I've carried since moving up to Skowhegan, this is a totally different place than I grew up, for sure. About 40,000 less people than I'm used to seeing around me, but it's been so great. And I think just having this mindset of just kind of, the goal was never to finish my service term, it was to enjoy every aspect of it as it progresses on. So it's not like, I'm done and it's like, we did it. It's kind of like, oh, I'm done now. Like, what the heck do I do? So I don't really know like what's next. And I'm glad we don't have to share that. So, but yeah, just kind of keeping that mindset of just enjoying the process and like how much you really can get out of any and everything you do when you kind of take that mindset rather than a finishing something type of mindset.
Yeah, I think that thought that Maggie left us with of taking stock of what you've got while you have it. Definitely. Anyone else?
I think one of the things for me that was pretty powerful about the service Nick and I did in Skowhegan was the importance of and power in just introducing yourself to people. And I don't necessarily mean people on the street, but, so Nick and I went around and conducted a series of interviews with business owners. And it was from that point on incredibly rewarding to walk around Skowhegan and recognize familiar faces and people you'd had a profound conversation with. And then you could return to those businesses and just, exchange a genuine hello with people that you had built a rapport with. And not that I'm going to conduct a survey with all of my new neighbors anytime I move somewhere new, but just how important it is in building and relationships with these people to just, introduce yourself and, have a genuine conversation when you go somewhere new. So that's something I'm going to take with me and hope to implement the next time I'm in a new place. So.
Yeah, I'm sure wherever you end up, people will appreciate that you're willing to show up and try to get connected and get to know them. Any other thoughts on this one? Oh yeah, go for it, Perri.
I'm hoping to take all of Gardiner with me and hopefully stay here a little bit longer. So that's hopefully my what's next. And but just being aware of what feels like home and what makes a welcoming home for myself, and being grateful for the choices that I made for myself that got me here.
Yeah, I think that's actually a perfect segue into our next question, because I was going to use a line from your talk, actually, Perri. You talked about this idea of not only the work that it takes to build community, but also this idea of allowing the community to help you build yourself, right? Building community and then being built by community. So one of the things that we wanted you all to reflect on, I know the question we sent you ahead of time was reflecting on your time as a fellow, can you share any insights about what it takes to effectively build community? So I just do still want you to talk about that, but I also wanted to add something in. If you have any reflections around how you were built by the communities that you've been a part of, I think we would also welcome those insights. So anyone have any thoughts on that one? It's also a big question, so you can take a moment.
I would say, like first and like kind of piggybacking off what Eliot just said, I think the most important thing is just being like a genuine person. Like especially when you're coming into rural towns, people don't want to see their town change. They have that identity and they love that. And like Nat said, everybody loves where they're from. They love their hometown. And just kind of never taking that approach of like, hey, I'm coming into your town and I'm going to change everything because I have a better idea than you. It's kind of like, let's all work together. And it's like that cliche that you hear in kindergarten, treat others the way you want to be treated type of deal. And that's where I feel Eliot and I just had so much success in Skowhegan, was we were just, like he mentioned, just being genuine with everybody, having a real conversation with them. And it really kind of propelled our work forward and led us to be able to do and complete projects that otherwise would have been very, very difficult had we not like just been a normal person when we go to meet these people. Especially being from away, going back to Eliot's talk there, that's what has like kind of helped me bridge that gap. So I haven't been called a Flatlander since February, and that's a pretty big deal out here. So everything's been going good.
Yeah, I think this idea of learning from and with the communities that you find yourself being a part of, definitely. Who else has a thought on this one?
I'll just follow up on what Nick said there. I think in addition to everything that he mentioned, I think two things. One, I think listening, right? Just approaching conversations with, ears open and mouth closed, and just listening to what people have to say and absorbing that. And then from there, following through on what you say you're going to do. I think a lot of these conversations that Nick and I have had would be pretty empty if there was no follow-up afterwards. So I think it's one thing to talk a big game, and I think it's another and a lot more valuable to follow through on the things that you say you're going to do. And I think having that trust established is really important in building a community.
Yeah, that transition to execution for sure. Anyone else?
Yeah. I'd say like a lot of my kind of community building and service happened remotely, which is just something that I think we all got a lot of experience with in the last year and a half and may not have had in the past. And one thing that I found was that the more kind of vulnerable and the more I could give of myself, the more I would get of other people. And that kind of would helped a lot in kind of building communities. And the Zoom conversations where kind of that back and forth happened were the Zoom conversations that ended up with me feeling kind of more energized than I had before, instead of kind of filled with Zoom fatigue. So that was a big thing I kind of learned about myself and just about kind of building relationships remotely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it was something Eliot said in his talk, this idea of cultivating constructive relationships rather than extractive relationships. So that back and forth and that give and take is definitely huge. Any other thoughts on effective community building or the ways in which you allowed yourself to be built by the communities you were a part of?
Yeah, I resonate with what Nat said about a lot of his experience community building being remote. That was a lot of my experience too, and especially with the social media management aspect of it. And something I learned from that was, again, going back to the point about being really intentional about the ways you build community and even the ways I construct posts and different types of opportunities for engagement on social media. It's because people still, they still know if the effort is genuine there or not, and it shows in the feedback we've gotten in events, in the ways people engage with not only the posts themselves, but with our programs like Eventsy, for example. So it's being really mindful of the ways you engage with people and seeing that through all of your outreach efforts.
Mm-hmm. I think the strategies you shared in your talk, Sam, I was jotting some of them down. I was like, this is great way to get people to show up in a meaningful way when you do that kind of behind the scenes intentionality around focusing on engagement. Anything else anyone wants to share before we go to the last question here?
Yeah, I really loved your kind of phrasing there of how you let the community kind of build yourself as well while you were doing this, community building work. And I've been talking about this kind of idea a lot with some of my friends who recently came here through other AmeriCorps programs, and how being in a new place and with the intention of trying to build community really gives you and enables you and allows you to explore new things, new activities, new parts of yourself in ways that you don't have any like predisposed like identities or things you're supposed to do or like or be, and how freeing that can be. And it allowed me to, go places alone, talk to people I didn't know, to the point that now I know even if I, have the confidence to go to a coffee shop or to go somewhere without knowing if anyone's going to be there, I know I'll run into people I know there and I'll be able to kind of talk with them and make those connections. And so that was been a main like takeaway through my time here as well.
Yeah, definitely.
I would echo that. And I think there's a lot to be said about having kind of like a blank slate for yourself to work with, and coming and immersing yourself into what's basically a completely, for me at least, different culture and lifestyle than I've ever been exposed to, and being able to soak that in and like appreciate your present situation. And I think that really does a lot to build your personality and your character, and allows you to really make a home for yourself in a new place.
Yeah, and I think this is actually, I feel like you guys have been teeing up these questions. So it's almost like you've seen them ahead of time. So thinking about the ways in which you've allowed yourselves to be inspired and influenced by the communities that you've been a part of. I know you've all been able to join us on the committee for conversations in the past. And it's been one of the things that I've reflected on each time I've gotten to work with you, is you can really see in your stories and the way that you talk about the work that you've been doing, that you've been intentional about allowing yourselves to be open to these communities that you found yourselves a part of. So thinking about the fact that we are moving towards our second year of the fellowship program, we'll be welcoming a whole new cohort of fellows. We wanted to ask you as a final question, if you could share, I want to make sure I get this right, so I'm going to look at my notes. As we look towards year 2 of the fellows program, can you each share one thing that you hope for either future Main Street fellows or the communities that you've been a part of? And it can be more than one thing too.
I was going to say, I think that's the hardest part of the question, is to whittle it down to one thing.
That's all right.
I think a couple things for me. I mean, I have sort of a longer term vision of, I would love to come back to Skowhegan in 5 to 10 years or whatever it may be, and see sort of this realized vision we've been talking about throughout the course of my service. So seeing the run of river whitewater recreation area in action, and seeing we've been doing a bunch of real estate work to redevelop some of the second floor stories of these historic buildings in our downtown. And so seeing those as renovated apartments that are up and running, and with new people moving to town because they want to be a part of this new recreation and outdoor food scene that's sort of coming to life. And then this whole entrepreneurial ecosystem that we've been working on developing. I guess this is the more near-term thing that I'm excited to see, is come back to Skowhegan perhaps in a year, or when the new fellow, and seeing the entrepreneurial facility that we are going to have set up running, and having people go in and use that space and take classes there. And I'm really excited for all that's happening, and there's a lot of momentum, so I'm excited to see where it goes.
Great.
I would echo everything Ellie just said, because from the beginning of my service, like how I mentioned in my talk, people were like, "What are you doing here? Why are you coming here?" And I even had like friends ask me, like, "Dude, what are you doing? Like, you're in the middle of nowhere." I was like, "Yeah, I know, but it's pretty cool." And just like seeing all these things, like Christina's ideas, like seeing all those come to life would just be mind blowing. And I know it would be amazing for this community. And even like the project that over at Maine Grange that Amber Lamke is working on, to this multi-story building coming into downtown Skowhegan, that's going to be mind blowing, coming back and seeing that actually come to life, and not just in the flip book that they hand out. But for the fellow, I hope that they have like, I don't know, like an even better time than I have had in Skowhegan, if that's possible. This has been such a great experience, and I hope that the fellow can kind of like find themselves the way I feel all of us have throughout our service term, and really kind of champion the work that they're doing and just fall in love with it, and like fall in love with the whole community development model, as well as like the Main Street 4.4 approach and all of that. Just kind of falling in love with it and finding themselves like the way we all have.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like both of your answers there just actually served as an extension of a point you made in your talk, Nick, about this idea of writing your own story and owning it, but then also being willing to see it come to fruition, right? And that's a whole other experience in and of itself. So thank you for sharing. Who else? So you've all got thinking faces on. This is definitely a reflective question, so you can take a moment to ponder it.
I would just say that I hope to see the further evolution of the downtown area here, and like the creation of a space that's welcoming to people of all ages to get involved, in particular the youth, because there's a lot of potential here for further growth in that area. And as far as the fellow goes, I hope that they have a similar experience to me and their ability to kind of ease right into life in Gardiner and make themselves at home, because people have been super welcoming to me here, and I'm sure they will be for them as well.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I think that for me, for the future of Rockland Main Street and Rockland in general, there's already such a huge constituency of people who not only care so much about what happens in Rockland and the future of the downtown, but are working towards kind of achieving a more resilient, equitable, vibrant place. But I hope that the number of people and like the different identities represented in that group of making this concerted effort kind of increases, and that there are more people who feel like they have the agency and ability and have the desire to kind of join this group that already exists, but just kind of increase those who are involved in the process of working and influencing the future of downtown. And for the next AmeriCorps fellow, kind of echoing what everyone said, Perri in particular, just I hope that they feel as welcomed as I have felt in Rockland, but also are as open to being as immersed into the town and in all of what the town has to offer, not just through the position, but everything about it.
Yeah, awesome.
One kind of project that I've been working on off and on is just kind of exploring the way equity kind of feeds into economic and community development. And I know that's something that from the job description, the next Downtown Center fellow is going to be working on as well. And I am just really excited to see where that goes, and to see kind of the envelope get pushed further and further on that, on how we can make our downtown communities and our community as a whole kind of more welcoming and equitable for everyone, bringing in more voices, et cetera. So I'm really excited to see that and to kind of track that into the future.
I think the optimism has been palpable in all of the reflections that you all have been sharing. Any other final thoughts on this one before we wrap up, or anything else that you wanted to chat with each other about before we move on to the close?
I'd like to echo what everyone said, and I'd also like to add that I hope the next fellow who takes my position, I hope they make their own discoveries that they can take and run with. Like, as I've said before, there were skills I didn't know anything about coming into this position, like things like video editing, social media, etc. And I hope that they're able to find their own unexpected things and become passionate about them and find ways to apply them meaningfully in ways that benefit everyone in the community.
I think that's actually a perfect note to end on. I think if I could just say something, and I'm going to speak on behalf of the rest of the committee members, and I know that they'll all agree with me. I think it has been, you have all exceeded my expectations in terms of what I would get to be a part of when I signed on to joining the committee. Your willingness to share your stories and also to show up for the communities that you've been a part of and that you've been serving with. I think as someone who arrived in Maine only in 2018, being able to work with all of you through this program has definitely been a huge catalyst for my ability to find and grow and be a part of community in Maine. And I'm sure the people that you worked with over the course of your fellowship feel the same way. So you all have definitely made an impact in your time here. And we're quite proud of what you've done. And we hope you come back for those of you that might be going elsewhere for what's next. And for those of you that are sticking around, Maine is definitely lucky to have you. So I'll turn it back to Adam to close us out, and thank you all again.
Thanks, Galen, and thanks you all for that conversation. It was a great way to bring everything together and hear more from you. I'm getting choked up again. I gotta say, I got feelings happening. You all have just had a tremendous impact, and Galen said that well. And as I said at the top of today, like the amount of hope and that through line of hope that you've provided me personally throughout the pandemic and our work together has been invaluable. So thank you. So this is my big thank you to you. Thank you to each and every one of you. Shout out to each of one of you. We're not going to focus on the what's next, but I'm going to say that like some of y'all know what's coming next. Some of you are still exploring what's next. So folks still in the audience, hire them or give me more money so I can hire them. Like these are folks that we want. Absolutely 100%. Incredible people, and as you heard, are part of making Maine better. So thank you to each of you. I want to give a shout out to the program committee. You all have been incredible, like guidance counselors, advisors, boards to bounce ideas off of, important question askers, so many things as we've started this new program. So thank you to each and every one of you. I want to thank our host site supervisors, who's another incredible group of people. You're all out there on the audience. And for those that don't know, our host site supervisors, you've heard them called out in most of their talks today. They're an incredible group of people that we're so lucky to have in our communities too. So thank you. And special shout out to Joanna, who's not only a host site supervisor, but works on the program team too. And she's here silently running everything in the background right now, which is her MO. So thank you, Joe, for doing all that you do. I want to give a shout out to Volunteer Maine and the commissioners of the Maine Commission for Community Service in particular. You all make this program and other AmeriCorps programs in the state possible. You do it with great care and passion and thoughtfulness, and deeply appreciative for your service on the commission. And to the staff at Volunteer Maine, we came in here cold, never having run an AmeriCorps program before. There's a lot to learn, there's a lot to do, and you were with us every step of the way. You're still with us every step of the way, helping us understand what we need to do, when we need to do it, and to make sure that we do it really well. I appreciate your high expectations for us, and really glad that we're part of your team and you're part of ours. And lastly, just thank you to everybody that showed up today. It's really an honor to share the fellows and some of their stories with you. I hope you've enjoyed today. I hope you'll carry forward the lessons and that you'll reach out and help us recruit our next crew of fellows. You'll get more information in email tomorrow to help spread the word that we're looking for our 2021 to 22 cohort of fellows, and appreciate you helping us find people that can fill these shoes, because they are big. All right, everybody, have a great afternoon. Thanks so much. Take care.